Smoke came through the floor first, thin gray tendrils rising between the flagstones like something alive.
The smoke shouldn't be here. The flue's cracked. I am breathing my own fire.
He dropped to his knees, dragging himself toward the only safety he'd built, a stone hatch cut into the channel network. Beneath it, a hairline fracture in the flue joint bled smoke like a severed vein.
The clay. I have to find the clay and pack this crack before the whole cabin is poison.
He worked the wet clay into the crack with trembling fingers, packing it until the smoke stopped hissing. Then he burst out into the snow, gasping for air while his dog circled him, barking.
I designed every stone of that floor, and it almost became my grave.
The dog had known something was wrong, long before John felt the burning in his throat. The hatch and clay had kept him alive. But he now knew the Andal was a double-edged blade, warmth on one side, death on the other. But the knowledge that saved him had come months earlier. In a dusty trader's book he bartered for with his last sack of coffee, it showed an ancient Korean floor, a firebox, a network of stone flues, and a chimney. Heat stayed in the stone.
If I can lay channels under my floor, one small fire will warm the whole slab for hours.
He spent that night copying every line into his own journal, then sketching how it would fit beneath his cabin.
The neighbors burn 4 cords of wood every winter. I'll burn 1/10 of that.
The next morning, he was on his knees in the dirt, tracing the serpentine path where the smoke would run. A passing trapper laughed. "You are burying your chimney. That's a widowmaker, not a floor."
Let them laugh. This isn't a stove. It's a whole different way of thinking about heat.
John dug alone through August, stacking loose stones into flue walls while his dog watched from the shade. When the first snow dusted the ridge, he sealed the last flagstone. The Andal was ready. So was the cold. By August, his palms bled into the stone dust. The channels curved through the floor like the drawing, but heavier.
Each flagstone has to lock tight. 1 weak seam, and the whole idea becomes a death sentence.
He built the firebox 3 hands wide, just enough for kindling, and connected it to the main flue with a sloping throat.
They call it a tomb. But if it works, I'll be the only one walking barefoot in January.
More than one neighbor stopped to watch. "That thing'll sweat smoke through the stones," a farmer said. "You'll wake up dead."
Smoke goes where the draft leads it. If I shape the flue right, it'll pull clean to the chimney.
He added a detail the Korean book never showed, a loose stone panel above the main joint, an inspection hatch he could lift.
If a crack ever forms, I don't need to tear out the floor. I just lift this stone and seal it.
By the time the aspen leaves dropped, the floor was laid and the firebox dry fit. The chimney waited for its first smoke. The first hard freeze would be his answer. Until then, he could only stare at the cold flagstones and hope his math was right. The night the temperature dropped below 0, John knelt before the firebox and struck his flint.
If this works, I'll never chop another cord of wood. If it fails, no, it has to work.
An hour later, smoke began curling between 2 flagstones near the wall, thin and silent.
That shouldn't be happening. The flue is sealed, unless one of the stones shifted.
He pried up the inspection hatch he'd built for exactly this reason. Below, a crack in the stone joint hissed vapor.
Clay. I have a bucket of it by the door. Pack the crack before the smoke fills my lungs.
He scooped wet clay and pressed it deep into the fracture, smoothing it flush against the stone.
The hissing stopped. The draft pulled clean again. I am not dead.
By midnight, the flagstones radiated a steady, gentle heat. His dog sprawled across them, tail thumping once.
I nearly died tonight, but now I know the Andal works, and I know exactly what can kill me.
By late November, the valley disappeared under a silence, so deep it swallowed the sound of an axe. John's chimney breathed a thread of smoke, no thicker than a candle wick. Inside, the flagstones stayed warm until dawn.
I burned 3 armloads of sticks last night. The Harrises across the creek burned half a cord.
Across the frozen creek, the Harris cabin vomited black smoke from a stove that devoured wood like a starved animal. From his window, John watched the neighbors strip their woodpile down to snow-covered bark.
They'll be out of wood by January, and I'll still have my stack untouched.
By December, the forest echoed with falling trees. Every man who owned an axe was carving up the valley. John's woodpile, barely a week's worth in any other stove, stood almost unchanged.
I know this floor could save them, but if I share and someone dies from smoke, that blood's on my hands.
So he said nothing, and the cold, patient winter waited for his answer. On the coldest night yet, Joseph Bell hammered on John's door with a fist already blue from frost.
John, I need wood. My daughter's been coughing 3 days, and the stove ate my last cord by midday.
His daughter? I remember her playing with leaves in the fall, but if I tell him how to build the floor, he might die like I almost did.
John glanced at his own woodpile, still enough for a month if he hoarded it, and his jaw tightened.
I can spare an armload, that's all. The rest I need for myself.
I've seen your chimney, John. You burn twigs while the rest of us bury our children. What are you hiding?
If he knew the truth, he'd want the Ondol, and if I build it wrong, his whole family could suffocate.
He thrust a bundle of kindling into Joseph's frozen hands, then stepped back inside, shutting the door between them.
You'll watch this valley die and call it prudence. I won't forget this, John Archer.
The dog whined low as John stood in the dark, listening to the crunch of Joseph's boots fade into the silent wood. The famine turned the forest into a slaughterhouse. Axes swung all night, and by dawn another old oak crashed. The valley floor became a graveyard of stumps, jagged and bleeding sap into the snow.
They're cutting down the seed trees now. Next year there won't be a forest left to burn.
A young farmer named Latham froze in his own barn because his woodpile ran out before the fourth storm.
Latham had 3 cords in October. He should have lasted until March. But the cold didn't care about math.
John's own stack of dried pine and oak still stood breast high, scarcely touched since November.
I am burning 1/10 of what they burn. 1 death from smoke, and they'd never trust me again.
He started avoiding the settlement, walking the long way around frozen pastures to avoid eye contact. Every time he saw smoke thicken over a neighbor's roof, the weight in his chest pressed harder, and still the valley froze, inch by inch, while the Ondol beneath his feet hummed with stolen heat. Late that night, John sat on the warm floor, his back to the frozen window, and listened to the silence outside.
I can still taste the smoke from that first night, acrid, like burning leather. The hatch is everything. 1 missed crack, and a family sleeps into oblivion.
He lifted the clay-sealed hatch and ran his fingers along the stone joint, as if expecting another fracture.
If I teach them and a child dies, I'll carry that grave forever.
But the image of Joseph's daughter, coughing in that frozen room, returned sharper than any smoke.
She has no wood. My floor could keep her warm for a month on twigs.
The dog pressed its cold nose into his hand, whining softly.
I could seal every flue myself, inspect every hatch, but if one fails...
He did not finish the thought. Instead, he closed the journal and sat motionless until the ember died. Word reached John at dawn. Joseph Bell's youngest daughter was burning with fever in a dying stove. He crossed the frozen creek without a word, his dog trailing behind, and pushed open the Bell cabin door. Inside, the family huddled under every blanket they owned, while the child shook with chills.
That cough is too deep. Another cold night, and she won't last. Joseph, I know a way, but it's dangerous. 1 wrong seal and smoke fills the room.
I don't care about danger. What do I have to do?
You'll dig trenches in your floor, lay stones, and seal every joint with clay, exactly as I say.
I'll do anything. Just tell me where to start.
This is the moment. If I teach him, the secret is out. But if I don't, she dies.
He nodded once and led Joseph outside. The Ondol would not stay his secret any longer. John led Joseph to his own cabin and lifted the clay-sealed hatch that had saved his life.
I lit the fire, and smoke poured through a crack I didn't know was there. Another minute, and I'd be dead.
And that stone, you just lift it and seal the crack.
The clay is everything. Without it, your family breathes poison. The hatch lets you reach it.
They went back to Joseph's dirt floor and began tearing it up, marking where the smoke would run.
If anyone else tries this without the hatch, they'll wake up dead. I have to teach this right, or I will kill them.
I'll build it exactly as you show me. My daughter won't spend another night in the cold.
First, the trench, 2 hands wide, sloping toward the chimney. Every stone locks tight, no gaps.
Joseph dug with the desperation of a man who had already buried one child in his mind. But the real test would be the smoke, and whether Joseph had learned the lesson John nearly died to teach. They worked through 2 days of bitter cold, fingers cracking as they laid each stone tight into the channel.
This stone here, it's the hatch. Lift it, and you can reach the main joint. Seal every hairline crack with clay.
Joseph's wife brought them water, her eyes never leaving the dark trench that was supposed to save her child. By evening of the 2nd day, the flue was sealed. John knelt and lit a single twig in the firebox. For a breath. Nothing. Then, a whisper of smoke snaked through a joint near the wall.
There, that's the joint I warned about. Give me the clay, quick.
He pressed the clay deep, and the smoke died. They waited, breath held, only the draft hummed. An hour later, the flagstones grew warm. Joseph's wife knelt and pressed her palm flat, tears freezing on her cheeks.
It's warm. The whole floor. It's like standing on summer ground.
It works. But if one neighbor skips the hatch, I've just handed them a loaded gun.
Within a day, the valley noticed. Joseph Bell's chimney breathed a thin wisp, but his woodpile hadn't shrunk. They found the cabin warm, the sick child sleeping on bare stone. By noon, a crowd had gathered at John's door.
The floor is a furnace, but without the hatch, a single crack will fill your cabin with smoke.
A settler named Harris didn't believe it was that delicate. He dug a straight channel and lit his fire that night. Smoke came through his floor like a ghost serpent. His wife barely pulled the children out into the snow.
That could have been me all over again, but now it's my design that nearly killed them.
John found Harris coughing on his knees, the floor already black with soot where the smoke had bled through.
He skipped the inspection hatch, Joseph. The smoke found the seam and spread through the entire floor.
That night, 3 more families came, desperate. "Build us the floor," they begged. "We'll risk the smoke." The Ondal had saved 1 family, but now it threatened to kill as many as it saved. Unless John could teach them all. 3 days later, another botched imitation caught fire. A woman's hands were burned pulling her son from the smoke.
I can't build every floor before the wood runs out. I have to train them to build for themselves. Joseph, I need you and 2 others. I'll draw the system once. After that, you teach your own families.
He sketched the flue on a plank, firebox, slope, chimney, and tapped the charcoal on the hatch.
This seal is the difference between a warm floor and a coffin. Pack it with wet clay, or don't light the fire.
The men studied the lines as if reading a map out of hell, desperate to get it right.
I'll make sure they follow every line, John. No more shortcuts. We learn it your way.
John made each man lift a practice hatch and seal a crack until their fingers remembered the pressure.
They aren't stone masons, but if they can feel a draft, they can stop a leak. They have to.
By nightfall, 3 new apprentices carried chalky handprints on their coats. The valley's first school of heat had begun. For 2 days, the barn became a workshop. Men knelt in the cold, tracing flue paths with sticks, then digging until their backs locked.
They need to feel the stone's weight. If a joint shifts, the whole floor turns against them.
On the 3rd morning, 2 brothers lit the first apprentice-built ondol. John stood at the door, watching for smoke. The chimney drew clean by noon. The flagstones warmed. Their infants slept barefoot on the floor for the first time.
2 cabins saved, but 15 more families are burning their last split wood tonight.
John walked the settlement at dusk, counting chimneys. The thin ones were warm. The others still belched black clouds.
We've stripped the West Ridge bald. Some men are burning green pine now.
Green pine will choke them with creosote. They're trading one fire for another.
That night, a half-built cabin collapsed from a smoldering chimney fire. The family barely escaped.
We can build faster than the wood runs out, but only if no one cuts the hatch. One mistake, and the valley burns.
The storm didn't announce itself. One moment the sky was gray, the next the valley disappeared under a screaming white wall. John and Joseph huddled near the firebox as the wind shook the cabin. The warm floor mocked them.
If the blizzard holds, the families on wood stoves will freeze before we can reach them.
2 days later, the wind died. A silence heavier than snow settled over the valley. They dug out of John's door and waded toward the nearest chimney. No smoke rose. Inside, a family shivered under a single blanket, their stove cold for a day.
Dig the trench here. We'll lay the stones and seal the hatch before sunset.
Men worked in shifts, moving from cabin to cabin, tearing up frozen earth by lantern light.
Every joint tight. The clay must be fresh. One leak, and we kill the people we're trying to save.
By dawn, 3 families were waiting for their floors to warm. The real race had just begun. A stray ember caught the roof at the farthest cabin. Flames swallowed the rafters before they could reach water. John dragged the youngest child out last, coat smoking. Joseph pulled the mother through the doorway as it caved. The cabin collapsed into glowing timbers. The family stood in the snow, homeless and silent.
Bring them to my floor. It's warm, and there's room. No one dies on my watch tonight.
That night, refugees covered every flagstone. Children who hadn't been warm in weeks slept without blankets.
I hid the ondal because I feared the smoke. But this fire wasn't the hatch. It was my cowardice. Tomorrow, I teach the hatch to anyone who can hold a stone. The ondal belongs to all of you now.
I'll teach them the way you taught me, John. Every joint, every seal.
A woman wept, not from cold, but because she believed for the first time her children might live. And so, the man who nearly died from smoke opened his cabin and his heart, and the ancient fire spread through the valley. The valley changed within a week. Where black smoke once choked the sky, thin wisps rose like breath on a cold morning. John and Joseph walked the snow-packed path, counting chimneys. 12 now carried the thin plume.
12 cabins. That's half the valley, but there are still 7 more without. The race isn't over.
Inside each converted cabin, children lay on heated stone, their cheeks pink for the first time since November. A single ember in the firebox was all it took to keep a whole family through the night. Even the wood piles, once stripped bare, had begun to grow again in the shadow of the cabins.
Look at the West Ridge. I haven't heard an axe in 3 days. The trees are still standing.
The famine is breaking, not because we found more wood, but because we learned to use less.
In the firebox, a twig caught from the ember. Smoke curled into the flue, invisible and clean. And every night, more chimneys lined the valley, like a string of prayer candles, each one a promise kept. Late that night, John lifted the hatch one last time. The clay was hard as stone, but the memory was still soft.
I can still taste the smoke from that night, acrid like burning leather. It never really left my throat.
The ghost of that first night flickered in the corner of his eye. Smoke, coughing, the dog barking.
That crack in the flue nearly killed me, but it also taught me the hatch, the one thing that made the ondal safe.
Without that terror, he might have never cut an inspection stone. The valley would have shunned the smoke floor forever.
The ancient Koreans built it for their homes. I built it for this valley, but the hatch is my own.
He remembered packing the wet clay into that first crack, fingers shaking, lungs burning, and how the smoke stopped.
That was the moment the ondal stopped being a danger and became a tool. The moment I learned to respect it.
He pressed the hatchstone down one final time, sealing more than a flue, sealing a promise, sealing a promise. The ondal no longer belonged to him alone. It belonged to everyone who would turn a crack into a lesson. John walked the valley trail with his dog at his heel, and from every chimney rose a thin, clean thread of smoke. The sound of axes had vanished. Woodpiles sat untouched, buried under fresh snow, waiting for a cold that no longer threatened.
Every cabin warm, every child pink-cheeked, and all we burn is a handful of twigs.
He stopped at Joseph's cabin, inspected a hatch, and showed a young builder how to test the clay seal with his thumb. Inside, 3 children lay sprawled across the floor, their cheeks flushed from the stone's steady heat. A single ember breathed in the firebox, no more than a star in a black sky, and the floor held the warmth.
That ember, no bigger than my thumb, is all it takes to keep a family alive tonight.
Dusk settled over the valley, and the chimneys became a constellation of thin threads against the purple snow. In the last cabin, a child reached out in sleep and pressed her palm flat to the stone and smiled. For the first time in memory, the valley slept through the night without fear of the cold. Spring crept into the valley, with the sound of dripping icicles and the smell of wet earth. John found Joseph by the creek, where the snow had receded enough to show green grass. They clasped hands without a word.
We made it, John. Not a single grave dug by the cold this year. The children are playing barefoot already.
On the greening slope, children chased each other over the still warm stones that peeked through the grass. John's dog rolled in a patch of sunlight, its belly up, legs kicking at nothing but joy.
They'll remember the winter of the warm stones, and they'll teach their children the way I taught Joseph.
The forest, too, had begun to heal. Buds swelled on the surviving oaks, tiny promises of shade to come. The woodpiles, still mostly full, stood as monuments to a winter that had failed to break them.
The Ondol wasn't just a floor. It was a lesson in what fear can become when you finally face it.
And as the last snow melted into the creek, the valley knew it had not just survived. It had learned to live. One quiet evening, John sat beside the firebox. The dog sprawled at his feet.
The floor still holds the day's heat, even with barely a twig.
He reached for a single dry twig and fed it to the ember. The flame caught, slender and orange, and the flagstones warmed just a little more.
Once, this floor nearly killed me. Now it's just home.
He looked up at the window, where a thin crust of frost clung to the pane, harmless now. The cold outside was a distant thing, no longer an enemy. The Ondol had tamed it. On the shelf, the old Korean book lay open. The diagram faded under the lamp's glow. It had all started with ink on a page, and now it was stone under the valley. He leaned back against the warm wall, closed his eyes, and let the ember do its work. The valley lay quiet under a blanket of stars, a dozen thin smoke plumes rising like silver threads into the dark. In every cabin, a single ember glowed, its warmth seeping into stone that had once been cold as a grave. Children clutched no blankets, only the steady heat of the floor, a gift from a land across the sea. In the end, John Archer did not defeat winter. He only borrowed a fire from across the world and taught the wind to move around his neighbors instead of through them. The ancient Ondol did not conquer the cold. It just gave people a place where the cold could not reach. And so the winter passed, not as a defeat, but as a debt paid to the past. What began as a stranger's diagram in a dusty book became the pulse of a community. And in every crack that was sealed, in every hatch that was lifted, the memory of smoke became the memory of warmth. Fade to black.